On the 50th anniversary of his death, a memorial stone will be unveiled in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey.
Rebecca Jones reporting. The time now 10 minutes past 8. MPs do not want prisoners to have the right to vote. They made that pretty clear earlier this year when they voted by 234 to 22 against it. It prompted the Prime Minister to say, "No one should be in any doubt. Prisoners are not getting the vote under this government." But the blanket ban is illegal under EU law, and the government has until tomorrow to show that it's doing something about it. That's why it's publishing 3 options for MPs to consider: keeping the outright ban or lifting it to varying degrees. And ministers have warned if they don't do something about it, they could face compensation claims running into millions. John Hirst is a former prisoner who's campaigned for many years for the right to vote. He says that even a partial lifting of the ban would still be a breach of human rights.
If you get sentenced to, say, 4 years of imprisonment, the government can't say you lose the vote because it's arbitrarily arrived at. And the same whether the cut-off point is 12 months or 6 months, you can't do that again because it's arbitrarily arrived at. And you can't sort of say, oh, all murderers can't have the vote, or all those convicted of manslaughter or rape or paedophilia can't have, because again, you're wiping the whole vote out in a blanket ban arbitrarily. You have to decide each case on an individual merit.
That was John Hirst. Well, we're joined here in the studio by Nick Herbert, the Conservative MP and a former Minister of State for Police and Criminal Justice, and in our radio car by Lord Lester, the human rights lawyer who not only sits on the Joint Committee for Human Rights but is also on the UK Commission on a Bill of Rights. Good morning to you both.
Morning. Good morning.
Now, Nick Herbert, and what we've seen from the government in this proposal, this draft legislation, it doesn't really look as though it's going to comply with what the European Court has ruled, does it?
Yes, I think it's doubtful that this will comply with what the European Court of Human Rights wants, and it seems that the government is effectively just playing for time. And ironically, one of the 3 options that the government is going to put down today, which is that we retain the blanket ban, is something that it's unlikely ministers will be able to either to advocate or vote for, because it's a breach of the ministerial code to advocate breaking the law, even though the Prime Minister himself said that there was no way that this government was going to give prisoners the vote, and that it made him feel physically sick to even contemplate the idea. And that, I think, just demonstrates the absurdity of the situation that we're in, that our elected House of Commons has voted by a 10-1 majority. Historically, we have always decided that it is wrong that prisoners of any kind other than remand prisoners should be given the vote. And now we have a supranational court deciding on, I think, the spurious grounds that this is some kind of human right, that prisoners should be required to have the vote, seeking to override the views of our elected House of Commons. And I disagree that it's a human right. I think it's a civic right, and I think it is entirely up to the House of Commons to take that right away if people have committed such a serious offence.
Lord Lester, it's interesting this because it's not as if Parliament doesn't know its mind. It knows absolutely what it wants. So perhaps that is the right answer, just kick the can down the road.
Parliament doesn't know what it wants, and you don't know what Parliament wants, because Parliament, for the last 7 years, has had no opportunity to vote on an actual bill. And what the government are now proposing... But
sorry, just forgive me for interrupting, Lord Lester, but the fact that they voted overwhelmingly by 234 to 22, as I say, for the blanket ban to be maintained, wasn't that a clear expression of what they want?
I don't know how the House of Commons or the House of Lords would react to an actual bill. The obligation upon the UK, when we signed up to the European Convention, was to abide by final judgments of the Strasbourg Court. This judgment was given in 2005. The obligation on the UK is not to give all prisoners voting rights. The obligation is to introduce legislation which does not continue a blanket ban. If I promised to give you lunch, you would not regard my promise as being honoured if when you turned up to lunch I gave you a menu and no food. A draft bill is not food, it is simply a menu. A menu was introduced by the previous government, by Mr. Straw, advocating that prisoners be given the vote up to 4 years of their sentence. Mr. Straw then has decided, the former Lord Chancellor no less, that we don't have to abide by judgments of the Strasbourg Court. That apparently is also the view of the Prime Minister. This diminishes our reputation across the world, whether in Beijing or Moscow, and makes me feel sick.
Nick Herbert.
Well, I think it's ridiculous, actually, to say that the idea that the House of Commons can't decide these matters diminishes our reputation. Actually, I think that the real problem here is that we have a supranational court that is causing the devaluation of human rights in the views of the public in this country by increasingly interfering in issues which it should not do. The Convention originally did not agree. Did not say that prisoners should be given the vote, but because it is interpreted by these European Court judges as a living instrument, effectively, that is the decision that they have made. And I think there are two issues at stake here. One is whether it's a good idea to give prisoners a vote. Fine, we can debate that, but Parliament has consistently decided we shouldn't.
It's that
and the other is who
question.
decides.
Well, it's that question of who decides, and we don't have a democratic override. It couldn't work that way if we did. Doesn't it damage our reputation, Nick Herbert, if we carry on as we are?
I think ultimately we will have to confront the fact that whether or not we want to continue to have this supranational court overriding us in this way, not least if the consequence is that prisoners will have to be compensated, something that I think the public would find doubly offensive if they were compensated to the tune of thousands of pounds because the House of Commons had failed to give them the vote. I think that is something that people would object to.
Lord Leicester.
Could I remind Mr. Herbert that it was Winston Churchill, Sir Anthony Eden and Harold Macmillan that urged that we went into the convention, including the promise to abide by judgments of the court. May I remind him that the right to vote is in a first protocol to the convention, which the Conservatives, unlike Labour, signed up to, and which binds us. And may I remind him as well that Cyprus and Ireland, two other common law countries, immediately gave prisoners voting rights as a result of this judgment. Well, the reason why I say this stains our reputation is that in Beijing, only 3 weeks ago, the Chinese were saying, why should we think about the rule of law if Britain can't abide by this judgment? It is an appalling blot on our entire record. We have always abided by judgments of the Strasbourg Court, and I really believe that Mr. Cameron should think again.
So the argument of Lord Leicester is that if we give prisoners the vote, this will immediately make Beijing and the Chinese leaders respect human rights. I mean, that is precisely what you're saying, and that is
not at all what I'm saying.
I'm not saying that we should resign.
No, hang on.
Hold on, Lord Leicester. If you want to come back on that.
Yes, please. In 1968, a Labour government passed a law preventing brown British citizens from settling in this country. It was done in 3 days and nights by a huge vote of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. However, that was in breach of the convention, and even though the overwhelming majority of MPs in both houses, I'm afraid, adopted a racist position, in the end, when Roy Jenkins was Home Secretary, we complied. All I'm saying is the fact that there is populism about this issue in the House of Commons no more justifies us than if it were in the Duma in Russia or in another part of Europe where they don't obey the rule of law.
I don't disagrey with the original convention principles that were laid down after the war, but they have been misinterpreted, and it's not just me that thinks that. The former eminent Lord Hoffman has talked about the very concept of human rights being trivialised by silly interpretations of grand ideas, and the Strasbourg Court taking upon itself an extraordinary power to micromanage the legal systems of the member states of the Council of Europe. What Lord Leicester calls populism, I call democracy, and it's quite clear that in this country neither the public nor the elected House of Commons wish to give prisoners the vote, and I think it's right that we have the last word in that matter.
Nick Herbert, Lord Leicester, thank you.
The time, 18 minutes past 8. Can the European Union reasonably be asked to manage with its budget frozen or indeed even